iconic moment where he's standing there, and it's just the storybook ending to a man's career, right? The last point he scores seals the last game. But here's the thing. Everybody wants that one moment right there. But that one moment was a lifetime of preparation. All right? So the point is that when we want those moments, how many times had he practiced that move? How many times had he taken that shot? How many times had he thought of that? Did he see it in his head, how he was going to do it, how he was going to exploit the weakness? Whatever was going on, it was about preparation. There is no real success without preparation. It's always true in almost in anything that you want to talk about. Things don't just magically happen. They're a result of dedication and preparation. Now, when we think about what's going on in Nehemiah chapter 2, there are many different ways we can go and think through what's going on. I want us to think about it through the lens of preparation because I think that's what Nehemiah is doing. And I realize there will be an emphasis upon what Nehemiah is doing. That's not to ignore what God is doing. Okay? But we believe very strongly that there is a relationship between those two things. That saying that we believe God doesn't mean that we sit on our hands and wait for Him to drop it in our lap. It means we get to work. And so, preparation isn't a lack of dependence on God. It's actually allowing us to be ready when God opens the door of opportunity. And so as we think about this chapter this morning in Nehemiah chapter 2, I want us to first of all just look at the text itself, kind of walk through, get familiar with what's going on, and then think about 2 points of application as they relate to us in local work and in helping churches grow and develop. Okay? So let's begin first of all by looking at the text. It breaks into 2 parts. The first 8 verses, he's seeking and gets the approval of the king, and then he moves into action, verses 9 through 20. So first of all, the approval. So we want to pay attention to the timing. Chapter 2, verse 1. In the month of Nisan, that is the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. And so this is the beginning of a year. Now I want you to see that there's first of all been a delay. Now there's debate about how much time expires between chapter 1 and chapter 4 or chapter 2. There's obviously a marker of timing in Nehemiah chapter 1 and verse 1 of Kislev. That's about 4 months separation, and that's why most people believe there's about a 4-month delay here. But as with anything, you can find people that will argue and debate literally anything. Okay? And so, either way, there is a delay between the time the news reaches him and the time when the opportunity presents itself to make an important movement on behalf of the people of God. Now, this was also a dangerous time, okay? Because what we're going to see as we continue on into verse 2 is that he says that he had never been sad in the presence of the king at the end of verse 1, and the king picks up on it. Now, when it comes to sadness in the presence of the king, again, there are multiple possibilities here about why this could be. I mean, it could be that, hey, I kind of like you, but I'm also involved in a plot that's about to poison you, right? You have a conscience that shows itself. And so sometimes when servants of the king would have that look upon themselves, it may indicate something ominous is coming. Other times, it could be that it's viewed to reflect negatively upon the king himself. You know, some of them wanted you to be floating on the clouds. Everything about my reign is perfect. And so it could be that if I just show the disposition of sadness, then maybe that says something about the king's reign. And so it was something that was dangerous, but yet something that was also natural. He's very moved, and that's what chapter 1 is all about, how deeply he is moved by the condition of the people of God. And he can't hide that. But you know, it's also a time of distributing, because when it seems like, again, when you kind of reconstruct it, it seems like there's a feast or a celebration or something going on. The fact that the king is there and that he has his queen with him, or as some would argue, maybe his favorite concubine, whichever it is, it does seem to be a festal time, okay? And it was a time in festivities when kings would often grant requests and do a number of different things. We see that in the Old Testament festivals, we see it in New Testament festivals, and we see it in secular history all over the place where people are granting those requests. And so you have Nehemiah's background of, okay, I've got the message of what has been happening. I've been praying about it. And as we're going to see, he'd been doing a lot of prepping too. And now the timing is right. And it's that pivotal moment when it's all going to come together. And no matter how much preparation goes into it, there's still a thought in the back of your head that goes, what if this doesn't work? So, the timing. Then we watch what we'll call the transaction take place between the king and Nehemiah. First of all, the king makes an observation, and the king said to me, "Why is your face sad, seeing that you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart." Then I was very much afraid. So the king is very attentive. He catches it very quickly. Apparently, Nehemiah has always had a positive disposition, but something is weighing heavily upon him. Not uncommon in people who see each other regularly to be able to spot that difference. So then he's given information. Nehemiah answers, and he said, "I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" You know, I love the way Nehemiah approaches this, because he doesn't just come out of the gate and say, "Well, here's the thing. You know I'm Jewish, right? And our walls have been destroyed and broken down. Yeah, and we've kind of been known to be difficult for other kings. So there's that too." He starts at a point where almost all ancient Near Eastern people would connect. A respect for the graves of their fathers. That's how he starts. Don't you see, if he adds in all this information, the king can his mind automatically takes off in all these directions, and he starts analyzing and thinking, and he meets him on a common ground and level that says, the graves of my fathers. You see, he's drawing the king to himself. And so he says that, of course, is what's going on, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. Then, in verse 4, the king asks a question where he somewhat interrogates him, and he says, "What are you requesting?" What are you requesting? Nehemiah, and here's the thing, I don't know about you, but well, we know this about communication in general. Roughly 90 to 93% of it is absolutely nonverbal. And I would love if sometimes I could hear the way the people in the Bible were saying and talking. What was their point of emphasis? What were they saying? What was the key word they were driving home? But when you look at this, apparently there was something in the way Nehemiah answers this question that the king says, hey, what you want to do? There was something in the way he answered that said, I'm passionate about this and I want to get involved in it. Because the king automatically asks, what we're going to do then. So, that then leads to Nehemiah's explanation. The first thing he does is pray. And he says, and I prayed to the God of heaven. Now, this is just my simplistic reading of it. I don't think that what Nehemiah says here is, could you excuse me a minute? And he goes to another room and he spends a lot of time in prayer. Now, I think he has already done that in this waiting period. I think he's done a lot of praying in the waiting period. But I kind of have this notion that Nehemiah does something kind of like this that I can identify with. God help me. Like, this is the moment I've been wanting to happen. It's upon me. Now please help me here. And so you can kind of see it as this quick crying out and close connection to God. Nehemiah is bathed in prayer. I mean, that's one of the things about the guy. He prays all the time. And so he's thinking, here's the moment. So he says, this is the project I have in mind. Verse 5. He says, and I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it. Notice that it's proactive. He doesn't look at him and say, this is what I think needs to happen. I think we need to put a commission together. I think we need to study, what we need to do. We need to send some people to scout it out. We issue a report. And then after they issue the report, then I think what we need to do is find somebody to head the project. He doesn't believe in things dying in bureaucracy. He himself and says, I want to go. I want to go back. I want to be involved. Did Nehemiah think he was the absolute best person for this? I don't know of a leader who always feels like they're fully qualified to lead anything. But if my heart is there and my dedication is there and my preparation is there, God has a way of taking care of it. And so there he is. And this project, you can, that's the thing. We're told certain things about the conversation. There may have been a lot more involved in the conversation. Or maybe he's also thinking about, the king is thinking about, well, if we can fortify this city and create goodwill, then we can also kind of help ourselves from the empires on the outside and their invasions and repelling it and doing all different types of things that could go on. So then we have another question from the king. The king said to him, with the queen sitting beside him, how long will you be gone and when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a time. Now here's the thing also. This tells us that there is preparation going on. How long is it going to take? Nehemiah doesn't have to say, I'll get back to you. He knows the answer. It turns out to be about a 12-year stint, right? But he already knows the answer. You don't know answers to questions like that unless you've been preparing. And there's a part of me that wants to just jump to the application on all these things, but I'm trying to force myself to stay here in the text, and then we'll get to the application. But remember that preparation, the timing. But then it goes even further than that. It's about passage. So he says this, If it pleases the king, let letters be given to me, that they may let me pass through until I come to Judah. Okay? So I'm going to need, not only this is how it's going to take, this is the paperwork I'm going to need, this is how I'm going to have to be able to go through the steps to get everything that I need, and that's even more with the provision. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress of the temple, and the wall of the city for the house that I shall occupy. And the king granted me what I asked, for the good hand of my God was upon me. So he knows exactly what he needs. He knows exactly what it takes. He's ready. He's ready. We need, just for a second on the application, we need to keep that in mind. So my older brother is a very successful businessman. He started it, and he's very successful. He's a very compassionate man. He's a very giving man, and is for kids. Anything involved in kids, he donates lots of money every year to kids. We walk into those meetings completely unprepared, asking them to give us blank checks. That money is not magic. It doesn't come. Grew up with him, sleeping in the twin bed next to him. We didn't have it when we grew up. I know what it has taken for him to get it. Anybody else to hand over money. If I show up completely unprepared, that if it were a business proposal, I wouldn't even get past the secretary. But we'll have more to say about that. So then he moves into action. Now the king had sent with me officers of the army and the horsemen. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant heard this, it displeased them. Notice he comes with a royal escort. It's a little bit different. Because he needs to establish authority. He needs to establish that he has the rights to do all these things, the protection that would be involved. And then, of course, as he arrives, as it always is, anytime someone seeks the prosperity of a group, especially a group that has not been cared for the way that they should, the people who have had the reign of terror never like the arrival of a true servant. They don't like true servants because now they can't fleece the people anymore. They've got someone that now people are going to see, wait a minute, he doesn't do things like this guy. He doesn't lead with an iron fist. He doesn't make demands. He doesn't assume upon things. And when power-hungry people start to see their power slip from their hands, they're going to throw a fit. When Nehemiah arrived, I got to tell you, there's got to be something about the guy that when they saw him, not that he's out here to crush skulls, but this guy means business. And that means that our reign of terror is over. So, then he begins the important work of assessment. In verses 11 through 13, and then in verse 16, I love how he does this secretly. It says, so I went to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. Then I arose in the night, and I had a few men with me, and I told no one what my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. There was no animal with me but the one on which I rode. I went out by night by the valley gate to the dragon spring, to the dung gate, and I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that were broken down, and its gates that they had been destroyed by fire. Verse 16, and the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, and I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and the rest who were to do the work. He doesn't come into town and say, all right, this place is a wreck. And this is what we're going to do about it, and I'm here to make this place what it should be. He's there for 3 days. And then, small group, one animal to ride on. When everybody else is asleep, he's surveying the damage. What have I got to work with? Let me see. And this is such a vital step when it comes to helping and moving churches in the direction they need to go. We got to see what needs to be repaired. And listen, a lot of times, well, I don't know about you, but when I move into a place in ministry, and I hope to never move again from where I am, I can say that in all honesty. I don't ever want to move again. But I always made it my practice. Look, until I've been there at least 12 months, I don't even know what the church events look like. I don't know what they mean. I don't know how they operate. I don't know the thinking, but I don't know anything. The first 12 to 18 months, I'm just trying to figure out what is. And I'm also making notes along the way in my head. Just ideas. There has to be an assessment period to know what's going on. And in that process, you're also trying to get to know people, to know how their personalities and their strengths work. And hey, I think this person, if we shifted them and we put them right here, I think we'd see a lot more results here. Not that everything, understand, is results driven, but I think there would really be some help if we shifted some people around the personnel. You have to begin with what is. And I love what one writer said. He said, look, if you want to go into the future, you want to have a vision for the future, you can't do that until you look at the past. You got to see it. Now, so where I preach now in North Alabama, next year, it's at least the second oldest church of Christ in the state of Alabama, perhaps the third. There's debate, historically speaking. Next year will be our 200th anniversary. Do you know how many good people it takes to survive 200 years and how many generations it takes to do something like that? Like, my honest goal is just don't blow it. There are 200 years of faithfulness there. And the preachers before me, they were serving 10 and 25 and 30. I'm the fourth one in the last 70 years. There's a tremendous opportunity there. Okay, there's tremendous history. But you and I both know, we've been in church work long enough to where you kind of get these different personalities. Some people want to live only in the past and hang on those things. Some people want to talk about, oh, none of that matters. That old stuff, that ain't going to grow the church anymore. We need to be focusing only on the future. We got to do this and this and this. And I got to be honest, many times I'm standing in the middle going, both are wrong. You got to have both. You got to understand who you've been. You got to understand the personalities that develop. Why did this practice start in this church? I can guarantee you there's an old timer in church you need to know very well who can explain the history of everything to you. But you have to make those assessments if we're ever going to help. And I would also say this, when you look at Nehemiah's, the way he arrives, and he doesn't go immediately into, I'm the guy. I think sometimes we need to remember that local churches, they have a Savior, and it's not us. They don't need us to rescue them. They need us to serve them. Moulton's been around for 200 years. They transcended individuals. So, the secrecy of the assessment. And in that process, he surveys the damage. Verses 13 through 15, he goes out and he moves in what appears to be a counterclockwise approach around the walls of the city, although certain parts are broken down that kind of hinder his full analysis. But he sees enough to know what is going on, and so he's surveying the damage so that he knows what is happening. And so when we're also dealing with the secrecy and the survey, one of the things, too, is when we go into a new work, we're excited about all the opportunities in front of us. And if we're not careful, we start vomiting them up on people, and then we somehow get offended because they're not ready to run with all of it. Back up. Back up. You don't have to get it all accomplished immediately. And you don't have to overwhelm people. Okay? So, secrecy. Look, do I have ideas written down of things that I want to see the church where I am do? Do I have them in my head, like a vision of where I want to go? It's always moving and molding and shaping and doing all those things. But you can't get it all at once. You can't get it all at once. And sometimes we have to stop. And one of the things I have this tendency to constantly examine what I'm doing and say, how could I have done it better? When this sermon is over, it'll be In my head, I'll be looking at all the things I should have said, didn't say, said it wrong, that could have been taken incorrectly. It's my nature. One of the things I've had to learn, though, in local work is to appreciate and to allow a lull to celebrate when we have accomplished something. Celebrate. We worked hard. We got it up. We were here. God prospered us. It's here. Now take a minute and just soak in it. Enjoy the goodness of God for a minute. We'll have another mountain here in a minute, and we'll get to it. But enjoy it. So then after Nehemiah assesses the damage, now it's time to make his appeal. It is time to talk to the people. And so he begins in verse 17 by saying, "Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned." He first of all has to get them to acknowledge it. Okay? Now, so my dad is a tent maker preacher. So he's preached my whole life, but he's also built houses my whole life. And one of the rules that he always had when he was helping people was, you don't move into your house unfinished. Why? You will never finish it. Because you go by, look, when we moved into our house in Knowlton, when we bought it and we moved in, I had several things that I saw them and they bothered me every time I walked by. My dad is a cabinet and a trim expert. So any little thing just sends me into, that's not how that's supposed to be. Okay? You know, I couldn't tell you where they are now. But you know, and that's something we have to remember, I think, when we go into churches. We've got to be careful that we don't come across as fault finders. And to remember that there are good people here. And just as easily as I have forgotten the things that I wanted to repair when I first bought the house, they've probably forgotten some of the things that they thought in the church needed to be improved too, and it's just kind of fallen by the wayside. It's not an intentional thing that says I'm anti the church or anti-God. But there has to be a moment where we can all acknowledge, hey, we've let some things kind of fall through the cracks here. Is that fair? To where we can all as a group acknowledge it, and he's building a coalition. And then he moves into action, and he says, so come, let us build up Jerusalem, that we no longer suffer derision. He calls them to serve and to be involved in the work that is at hand. He doesn't say, I'm going to do it on my own. And listen, lone rangers aren't leaders. Maxwell, my favorite Maxwell statement about this is, if you're a leader and nobody's following, you're just a guy taking a walk. That's all you are. You got to have people following you, and you have to know how to work with them and not manipulate them. Be sincere. Then he gives them assurance, and he says, and I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also the words of the king that he had spoken to me. Notice what he does. He says, first of all, he knows that, look, anytime you do anything, you've got people that are in like 3 different camps. What time am I supposed to be done, by the way? I don't even... Okay, 5:50. Okay. So, Nate Bargatze is a clean family comedian. Love the guy. So he tells this story of, how and he's in his mid-40s, he's like, when you get older, people invite you out, you have these 3 different reactions. He's like, you're 20 and someone invites you out and you say, I'm down, I don't care what it is. I'll set my apartment on fire right now. I'll go with you and move and won't even come back. In your 30s, someone says, hey, let's go somewhere. You say, who all's going? Is it loud there? I think I'll go, but I'll drive myself. He says, at 40, I'm offended that you would even think I would want to go out past 9 o'clock. And it's funny, but it also helps me to remember that when you do church work, it's kind of like the same. There's some people, no matter what you ask them to do, they'll burn their house down if you ask them to. There are other people, they're with you, but they need some things answered. They need a little more explanation. They need a little more this and that. And you got some people, they may never get on board, and you're going to have to live with that. But you have to have a way to assure them. And what Nehemiah is doing here, he says, first of all, let me assure you, all of you who are having questions about rebuilding the walls, let me assure you, number one, God is with us. And number two, the king has also signed off on it. Because you can imagine them thinking, we've tried this before back with the temple stuff, and they shut it down. By the way, just because you try something and it doesn't work, doesn't mean that what you did was wrong. And I would equate that to, I've got 3 little boys, and let's say we're playing Go Fish. And I look at my middle son, Connor, who's big old blue eyes, all kind of emotion, just full of emotion. And I say, Connor, do you have any 9s? Nope. And I take my cards and I throw them down, and I say, I'm never playing this game again. Or I could be a normal human being and say, he doesn't have any 9s right now, but that doesn't mean that he won't ever have 9s. It just means I did it at the wrong time. Sometimes it wasn't the project, it wasn't the program, it wasn't anything. It just happened to hit at the wrong time. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try it again. Okay? So, he offers them those assurances, because the first thing a lot of people will say when you propose new is what? We tried that before. Okay? Then the people move in and they accept, they buy in. Let us rise up and build. We're with you. We want to follow you. And then, of course, as always, you've got your attacks. What do these people think they're doing? They're going to rebel against the king again? Nehemiah answers them and he says, look, this doesn't concern you. Now, that's not necessarily a strategy I would suggest we take to members of the church. Okay, that's not exactly a parallel. Okay, these were people outside of the covenant community, cared nothing for the people of God. That's very different than a church member who is a little skeptical. Okay, because sometimes we can take these Old Testament texts and we're like, well, I'm just being like them. No, you're not. You're not. Okay, and I mean that with all sincerity. That's not parallel. Okay. So Nehemiah has been preparing, and he's preparing the people, and now they're ready to work. Okay, very quickly. 2 things. Number 1, we need to ask ourselves, what are we doing to prepare ourselves for the doors of opportunity that God will open? And the first question we have to ask ourselves is, do we really believe God is going to open doors? Because so many people have accepted the fact, well, we think the churches of Christ are dead, and we think they're going to die. And they're promoting everything they do under the model, churches are dying. Well, that's a whole different discussion, and I don't buy that. But the church is alive and well. And don't believe reports of its demise. And please don't perpetrate them. Please don't be one who constantly reports that the church is in trouble. God is able to open doors. The question is, do we still believe it, or are we using it as an excuse to sit on our hands? It's a big difference. So, what do we need to be doing? We need to be making preparations. We need to be building bridges. Building bridges and finding out strengths and weaknesses all throughout our particular congregation. We're finding out who people are. We listen to them. I mean, who hasn't been in a conversation with someone and you hear them say something and immediately in your mind, you never let them know, but a light bulb goes off that says, this guy's perfect for this idea I got. His personality fits it. She knows exactly how to operate this. But we're learning the people that we're serving alongside with, and we're getting ready for those moments. We're also making inroads into community. Look, Moulton is a small town, okay? As you're shocked, I mean, I know. Its claim to fame is it's the birthplace of Jesse Owens, the Olympian, who was, by the way, during the 30s. It's a small town. I'm a small town ministry guy. I love it. I can know almost every person in our community and can have conversations with them. I can coach their kids and ball with my kids. I love it. I love it. And I can build bridges with people in the community. But we have to constantly be about that. You see, a lot of times people want these big moments. I want the Nehemiah. I want to rebuild the wall in 52 days. Hey, but the only way you rebuild the wall in 52 days is one brick at a time. And if we prepare and we build bridges and we understand who our people are, we understand what our community needs, then there's going to be this light bulb moment where you realize what my community needs and what we can do and the people who can operate, and now they're coming together. and the congregation can be blessed, and the people within the community can be blessed, and they can grow. But then there's a preparation process. So I'll just relay a story of there's a person who's very passionate about feeding the hungry in the local community at a church. And they come and they say, look, we're passionate about feeding the hungry in this community, but our elders won't get behind it. Okay? So my question is, well, I mean, what do you mean by that? And this is not where I'm currently preaching. And they said, well, you know, we've mentioned it to them, and they've done nothing with it. Wait a minute. If this chapter shows me anything, listen, first of all, elders' primary responsibilities have to do with people, actually meeting and shepherding the people. My goal, if I have any proposal, is to put everything in front of them in an organized way to where all they have to do is ask me questions that say, hey, what about this? Have you thought about this? Have you covered this? What is it going to cost? What is it going to take in investment? Do you have people on board? How long is it going to go? To where they don't have to think about any of those things. When Nehemiah went to the king, he didn't go into the interview and the king said, how long is it going to take? No. I don't know. Well, how many people do you think can work? I don't know. Well, but I am going to need a blank check. No. But we do that. And we say, oh, the leaders, they don't have any faith. They have every bit of faith. Faith sometimes, though, is being prepared to execute faithfully. And that's what we have to be about. And that's what Nehemiah, I think, shows us here. So the question, I want to just leave a couple of questions. First of all, just think about this as I think about it for myself. What are we doing to prepare to make our home congregations everything God wants them to be? Is that even on our radar? Yes, churches are faithful. No question about that. But churches are filled with people, and they're filled with you and me. So I know they're not perfect. They got room to improve. That needs to constantly be on the radar. Or are we sitting on our hands and squandering opportunities and refusing to believe God? Listen, when we don't operate like this and prepare as if we know God is going to work, you know what that's called? It's called unbelief. When the children of Israel refused to go into the promised land, do you remember what God said to them in frustration in Numbers 14? How long will you keep? How long will you not believe me? We get to be involved in the greatest restoration project in the history of the world. That's what Jesus came into the world to do. And by the way, we could spend way more time looking at the mission-minded, the mission-focused statements of Jesus. He knew exactly why he was here. He knew exactly what he was doing, when he was doing it, why he was doing it, who he was doing it for, what his itinerary was. He knew it. We get to be involved in that. We just got to prepare for it. And then we get a front row seat. Isn't that the coolest part about preaching? You get a front row seat to watch what God does. Greatest feeling in the world. Thank you for your attention.
Appreciate Brad. Encouraging words.